Why was the sky so quiet? No engine roars, no hum of traffic below, no radio chatter. Just a vast, aching silence that seemed to stretch forever. 30,000 feet above the Baltic Sea, silence wasn't just eerie, it was impossible. Yet here they were, suspended between storm and sunlight, as if time itself had cut communication. Lena Markovic stared out the oval window, her reflection trembling against a sheet of white clouds. She didn't look like someone carrying a secret. 17 years old, quiet, her hair pulled into a loose braid that had come undone during turbulence. To anyone glancing her way, she was just another passenger, a student flying to a competition in Germany. But beneath her calm, beneath the soft way she held her father's old radio, was a history few could have survived. A faint hiss came through her headphones, static, white noise, the language she'd learned better than human conversation. She adjusted the dials with gentle precision, her thumb brushing the copper wire wrapped around the radio handle like a good luck charm. She wasn't listening for news or music. She was listening for ghosts. 3 years ago, her father, Captain Anton Markovic, NATO F-22 pilot, call sign Raven 6, had vanished during a mission over Mariupol, officially declared killed in action. No body, no wreckage, just a voice that had gone silent mid-transmission. For 3 years, Lena had been listening to the frequency he used, 229.5 megahertz, a military channel no civilian should have access to. Every night, she sat by her window in Warsaw, radio on, scanning the airwaves, hoping the sky might answer. It never did, but she never stopped trying. Her classmates called her delusional, the girl who listens to ghosts. They laughed when she built her own radio using parts from her father's old equipment. They mocked her when she said analog frequencies never really die, they just wait to be heard again. But Lena knew things most people didn't. The old systems, the forgotten ones, were built to survive when everything else failed. That belief, poetic, impractical, yet unshakable, had brought her here, onto Flight 317 bound for Berlin, her presentation carefully packed beneath her seat. Emergency communication resilience in electromagnetic interference environments. Most people thought it was just theory. For her, it was a promise. The man sitting beside her, Klaus Weiss, was in his 70s, a retired aviation engineer whose mind still hummed with equations and turbine blueprints. He noticed her radio, smiled kindly. "Does that old thing still work?" Lena returned the smile, faint but steady. "It only goes silent when the sky doesn't need to save anyone anymore." Klaus paused, then nodded as if those words carried a wisdom he'd long forgotten. He would later tell reporters that she looked out the window like someone searching for a lost soul, like she believed the sky could hear her. And maybe it could. She had whispered the same phrase every time she boarded a plane. "Raven 6, this is your daughter. If you can hear me, watch over us. Keep us safe, I'm listening." The words weren't superstition. They were ritual, a connection across frequencies between grief and faith. But faith has a cruel sense of timing. An hour after takeoff, Flight 317 entered a storm that hadn't been on any radar. A surge of electromagnetic interference swept through the cabin like an invisible wave. The lights flickered. The intercom crackled. Then, silence. The pilots lost all communication, radar, and navigation systems in a single, suffocating moment. The captain's voice finally burst through, tight with control, edged with fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing temporary system interference. Please remain calm." But Lena heard what others didn't, the chaos behind his voice, the distortion that meant total failure. She looked down at her radio. The green light flickered once, twice, then locked onto a signal. Frequency 229.5, her father's channel. It shouldn't have been possible. Civilian aircraft couldn't connect to military frequencies. The systems were designed to prevent that. But the storm had changed everything, scrambled everything. And in that chaos, Flight 317 had latched onto a ghost. Klaus noticed her expression harden. What is it? Lena's hand trembled slightly as she turned a dial. The aircraft's broadcasting silence on my father's channel. He frowned. That's impossible. I know. She stared at the frequency readout, her pulse quickening. The co-pilot's voice came over the intercom, clipped, brittle. We've lost contact with ground control. All channels are blocked. Attempting emergency transponder relay. But there was no relay. The storm had swallowed every signal. A voice from the back, nervous, sharp, broke the tension. Let the kid use her toy radio. Maybe she can talk to aliens. Laughter rippled through the cabin, brittle and hysterical, the kind people use when they're too afraid to scream. Lena stood. I can help. A flight attendant rushed toward her. Miss, please sit down. I know what's wrong with the system, she insisted. You need to stay seated. Klaus rose beside her. Let her try, he said firmly. I'm an engineer. She's right, she might understand this better than anyone. The attendant hesitated, looked toward the cockpit. The plane jolted violently, the turbulence throwing coffee cups into the air. The air was full of fear, raw, human, unfiltered. When the co-pilot finally stepped into the cabin, his face was pale, eyes wide with exhaustion. You understand radio systems? Yes, sir, she said. Your communication has locked onto a military frequency, 229.5. It's an old NATO backup channel. You're broadcasting silence because you don't have authentication codes. He blinked, and you do. My father did. I have his radio, his equipment. I can send the codes. For a heartbeat, the cockpit was silent except for alarms and the low groan of engines fighting turbulence. Then the co-pilot nodded once. Follow me. Lena walked down the aisle, gripping her radio like a lifeline. She passed faces twisted in terror, people clinging to loved ones, praying, sobbing, bargaining with gods they hadn't spoken to in years. Her steps were steady. Inside, she was anything but calm. Her father had taught her how to breathe through fear, one heartbeat at a time. The cockpit was a storm of lights, warning signals, and human panic. The captain barely looked at her, his attention fixed on keeping the plane level. Do what you need to, he said hoarsely. Just make it work. She connected her radio to the auxiliary input, hands shaking but precise. The static shifted, sharpened. She began entering numbers, her father's codes. She'd memorized them when she was 13, tracing them from his old flight notebook, a relic she'd kept under her pillow for years. One by one, she entered the digits. For 972, the storm roared outside. The aircraft shuddered. Then a soft tone, a ping. The auxiliary radar flickered green. The co-pilot gasped. What did you do? I activated Raven 6's call sign, she whispered. NATO will see us now. Hundreds of miles away in a NATO air command center in northern Germany, an alarm screamed. On the radar screen, a familiar call sign appeared, one that shouldn't exist. Raven 6 active. Officers rushed to verify. The system had been dormant for years. Cross-check that code, the senior controller barked. That's impossible. Raven 6 is deceased. Another operator stared at his monitor, heart racing. Sir, the signal, coming from a civilian aircraft, Flight 317. The controller froze. Get me air command now. Two F-22 Raptors on patrol received the alert moments later. The lead pilot, Colonel Marcus Reed, felt his breath catch when the name appeared on his HUD. Raven 6. His mentor, his commanding officer, the man who'd saved his life in a training accident and who'd never returned from Mariupol. He whispered, that's not possible. But orders came fast. Colonel, divert to intercept, potential hostile use of stolen codes. Reed's voice hardened, copy that en route. His jet tilted sharply, engines igniting into thunder. He didn't believe in ghosts, but for the first time in years he wanted to. Back in the cockpit, Lena's radio hissed. She pressed the mic button. NATO Air Command, this is Raven 6 authentication. Civilian Flight 317, total communication failure. Requesting emergency vector guidance. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence, as dozens of operators processed the voice of a young girl speaking in perfect military cadence, using codes last heard from a man they'd buried in classified archives. Then through the static, a calm voice answered. Raven 6, confirm identity. Lena swallowed hard. I'm his daughter, Lena Markovic. In that moment, two fighter pilots 200 miles away looked at each other, the same disbelief mirrored in their eyes. In the NATO center, a young officer whispered, Sir, Raven 6 had a daughter. And the controller, the same one who had signed the report marking Captain Markovic as killed in action, whispered back, Then he's still saving people. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the clouds like silent explosions. Flight 317 trembled but held steady. Inside, a 17-year-old girl kept the connection alive, between past and present, between silence and salvation. Faith isn't always about belief. Sometimes it's just about refusing to stop listening. What do you do when the sky answers a dead man's call sign? In the NATO command center, officers were standing, not sitting. No one wanted to be the one caught unaware if the impossible turned real. A young tech analyst repeated the data again and again, almost pleading for it to make sense. Signal authenticated at 229.5 MHz. Encryption matches Captain Anton Markovic's codes exactly. The senior controller's voice was a whisper. That's impossible. He's been gone 3 years. And yet, the analyst said, pointing at the monitor, his call sign just requested emergency vector guidance. General Hoffman entered the operations room, coat unbuttoned, the weight of authority in every movement. Talk to me. Civilian Flight 317, no comms, no nav. Broadcasting a dead pilot's authentication code. Hoffman frowned, hijacking. We don't know, sir. Voice on transmission is female, young. The room went silent again. Every officer exchanged uneasy looks. Somewhere between disbelief and reverence, a legend had just stirred awake. 200 miles away, Colonel Marcus Reed's F-22 cut through a bruised sky, vapor trails slicing thin white scars across the clouds. Inside the helmet, his breath fogged the visor slightly with each exhale. Raven 6. The name burned in his memory like tracer fire. Markovic had been his mentor, his friend, the man who'd stayed behind during a failed extraction so Reed could live. Reed remembered the radio static that night, the silence that followed, and the funeral with an empty casket. And now that same call sign was back, pulsing on his display. Falcon 2, you seeing this? He asked his wingman. Copy, sir. Raven 6 authentication confirmed, but how? Doesn't matter. We find them before someone panics and shoots first. Lightning flashed ahead, revealing the civilian jet tumbling through pockets of turbulence. Reed pushed the throttle. His jet responded like muscle memory, the sound of engines that could break the sky itself. Inside Flight 317, the world was chaos held together by one teenage girl's calm. The captain barked orders over the alarms. Altitude 29,000. Maintain heading. Heading gone, sir, the co-pilot answered, eyes darting between dead screens. Lena didn't look up. Her fingers danced over the radio controls, tuning, adjusting, steadying the connection that flickered with every lightning strike. Klaus held on to the seat behind her, knuckles white. You're actually talking to them, aren't you? Lena nodded slightly, not taking her eyes off the frequency meter. If the signal holds, they'll send guidance vectors. The F-22s can track us by radar. And if it doesn't hold? She exhaled softly, then we fall. Her voice carried no panic, just the kind of quiet acceptance you hear from someone who's already faced loss once and knows how it sounds. A burst of static cracked through the cockpit speakers, followed by a clear voice, steady, authoritative. Raven 6 signal, this is Colonel Reed, Falcon 1. Identify yourself. Lena swallowed, then pressed the mic. This is Raven 6-2. My name is Lena Markovic, daughter of Captain Anton Markovic, call sign Raven 6. We have total system failure. We need emergency vector guidance. Reed froze. Even through the static he could hear it, the cadence, the discipline. The way she spoke sounded like her father. He closed his eyes for a second, hearing another voice layered over hers, Anton's voice, calm under fire. Keep your tone steady, even when your hands shake. He opened his mic again. Raven 6-2, copy that. We have you on radar. Maintain altitude. We're forming escort. In the background, his wingman whispered, awed. She said Raven 6-2. Yeah, Reed murmured. She did. In the NATO command center, the tension broke into motion. Confirmed communication between Flight 317 and Falcon 1, an officer reported. General Hoffman leaned forward, patch me in. But Reed's voice cut through first. Command, this is Falcon 1. Visual on Flight 317. Civilians on board. Repeat, civilians. Young female using authenticated military codes. Request permission to establish escort, not engagement. The answer came back cold, procedural. Negative. Possible hostile infiltration. Maintain weapons hot until further verification. Reed's jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, if someone wanted to impersonate a pilot, they wouldn't choose a dead man's code from 3 years ago. Colonel, that's an order. Orders, the word tasted bitter. Reed had followed them all his life, until the day Anton Markovic didn't. He switched back to the open channel. Raven 6-2, this is Falcon 1. We're alongside you. Can you stabilize heading? Lena's reply was calm, practiced. Manual control only. We're blind on nav. Copy that. I'll feed you coordinates. Just keep that signal alive. Klaus glanced out the window and gasped. Through streaks of rain, the sleek shape of an F-22 appeared, flying close enough to make out the insignia on its wing. Another jet flanked the opposite side, silent guardians cutting through the storm. The cabin filled with murmurs, disbelief, prayers. Fear turned to awe. Lena's radio crackled again. Raven 6-2, your signal is strong. Keep transmitting on current frequency. She pressed the transmit key. Copy, holding steady. For a moment, the chaos of the cockpit quieted. The storm outside still raged, but inside, there was something almost sacred in the hum of old technology bridging generations. The green light on her radio pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. In the NATO command center, not everyone shared the reverence. General Hoffman stared at the tactical display, face pale. If those codes are genuine, it means classified encryption was compromised. This could be espionage. We can't take that chance. A younger officer shook his head. Sir, with respect, that voice, she's a kid. She's asking for help. Or she's bait, Hoffman snapped. We lost men because of compromised codes before. Prepare engagement contingency. No one dared speak after that. Back in the sky, Reed's HUD flashed with the new order. Authorization to engage if hostile response detected. He cursed under his breath, not this time. He toggled to the private channel with his wingman. Falcon 2, listen carefully. If command orders fire, you hold position. Understood. Understood, sir. Reed exhaled. If I disobey, you'll be covering my court-martial. Wouldn't be the first time following the right man looked wrong on paper. Lightning split the clouds, revealing the full shape of the civilian jet. Reed could see through the cockpit glass now, the pilots straining, and beside them, a girl with dark hair, wearing old-model military headphones. She was holding a radio that looked familiar. He knew that model, a Falcon TX, standard issue 15 years ago, the same one Anton used during training. He didn't believe in miracles, but that sight, that girl using that radio, felt like one. He switched back to the open frequency. Raven 6-2, you're doing great. We're guiding you west. Berlin airspace is ready for emergency clearance. Her voice cracked slightly when she answered. Copy Falcon 1, she hesitated. You knew my father. Reed's throat tightened. Yes, he saved my life once. I guess he's still saving people, she said quietly. For a heartbeat, the radio was silent, the kind of silence that meant no one wanted to breathe too loudly. Then Reed said softer, yeah, he is. In the cabin, Klaus turned toward her. They're protecting us. Lena nodded, eyes wet but steady. No, they're protecting his name. On the ground, chaos unfolded in a different form. News feeds began lighting up across Europe, anonymous reports of NATO fighters escorting a civilian jet. The words emergency, storm, and Raven 6 spread faster than official statements could contain. The world didn't know what was happening, but everyone felt it, the weight of a story rewriting itself in real time. In the command center, the analysts were digging deeper into the archives. Sir, I found something, one of them said, breathless. Captain Markovic's final mission logs, they were sealed. Hoffman looked annoyed, and he disobeyed orders to protect civilians, saved 43 lives. Command buried it to avoid political fallout. The words hung in the air like a moral verdict. Hoffman looked away, jaw tightening. That's classified. Not anymore, the analyst whispered. Above them in the bleeding sky, Lena's signal held steady. The captain of Flight 317 risked a glance at her. How are you holding up? She managed a small smile, trying not to think about what happens if it fails. He nodded. Your father would be proud. Her eyes flicked to the storm beyond the glass. I hope he's listening. And maybe he was, because just then the static on her radio shifted, subtle, like a whisper woven into noise, a rhythm, faint but deliberate. She froze. Did you hear that? Klaus leaned closer. Hear what? She turned the dial slowly, isolating the sound. It wasn't interference. It was patterned, familiar. Morse code. Dot dash, dot dash dash. She translated instinctively. Hold course. Her breath caught. She whispered it aloud. Hold course. Klaus frowned. Who's sending it? Lena didn't answer. Her eyes glistened. Maybe the only person who still can. The plane shuddered again, lightning blooming white against the cockpit, but she didn't flinch. She held the mic, voice steady. Copy that, holding course. Outside, the F-22s adjusted formation, gliding closer like wings of faith cutting through the storm. And in the command center, General Hoffman stared at the transmission logs, his voice barely audible. Raven 6's encryption, it's still generating responses. The analyst looked up. Sir, that's not possible unless... Hoffman interrupted, a trace of awe breaking through the authority. Unless someone else is still listening on the other side. Faith, it turned out, was a kind of frequency. You couldn't see it, you couldn't measure it. But when the right voice called, it answered. How far would you go to defend a dead man's honor? Colonel Marcus Reed didn't believe in ghosts, but as he flew beside that civilian jet, the line between science and spirit felt thinner than the clouds he cut through. Each time the green light on his HUD flashed Raven 6 signal active, his chest tightened. He wasn't looking at an enemy or a malfunction. He was looking at memory resurrected. Inside Flight 317's cockpit, Lena adjusted the tuning knob again, her eyes darting between the flickering radio light and the window where the F-22s hovered like steel angels. Her father had once told her, you can't see radio waves, but you can feel when someone's out there. She felt it now, a hum, a pulse, something alive threading through the static. Klaus, still braced behind her, whispered, Are we safe now? She shook her head slightly. Not yet, They can hear us, but command hasn't decided whether we're worth saving. Below, in the NATO command center, that exact decision was unraveling like a moral knot. General Hoffman, a communications officer said, voice trembling slightly. Colonel Reeds confirmed it's a civilian aircraft. The girl's transmitting authenticated code, using what appears to be a 1990s Falcon TX radio. Hoffman folded his hands. Where would a teenager get access to restricted equipment? She's Captain Markovic's daughter, sir. The general froze mid-breath. That name is classified. It's not anymore, another officer murmured, pulling up old mission logs. Sir, there's something you need to see. He hesitated, then nodded. The screen filled with aging reports, grainy mission footage, encrypted logs, fragments of audio. The words Raven 6 disobeyed direct order appeared in red. But further down, the truth unfolded in black ink. Diverted from combat route to protect humanitarian convoy. Saved 43 civilians. Lost contact during withdrawal. Hoffman stared at it. This was buried. Yes, sir, the officer said quietly. To protect command, not him. The general's throat tightened. For the first time in years, the weight of his uniform felt heavier than the honor it once represented. What would you do, he muttered, half to himself, if the daughter of a man you erased just made the whole world remember him? Up in the air, Reed's voice broke through Lena's radio. Raven 6 to maintain heading. You're entering Berlin airspace. We'll guide you in. Her response was calm, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Copy Falcon 1, thank you. She glanced at the radio, fingers tracing its edges, her father's fingerprints still faintly visible under the metal casing. Then a new transmission interrupted, sharp and cold. Falcon 1, this is NATO command. You are ordered to prepare for engagement protocol. Possible hostile infiltration confirmed. Reed's blood ran cold. Sir, with all due respect. That's a direct order, Colonel. He could almost hear the political fear behind the words. If the codes were active, if the encryption was still alive, someone at command would have to explain how. It was easier to erase evidence than to admit failure. He switched frequencies. Falcon 2, you hearing this? His wingman's tone was iron. Loud and clear, what's the plan? We don't shoot civilians. Not today, not ever. Back on the jet, Lena sensed something change, a tightening in the air, an invisible shift in the frequencies around her. The F-22s adjusted formation, their wings banking slightly. She felt it in her chest, the rhythm of decisions being made far away that could end everything in seconds. Klaus saw her pale. What's wrong? They're not sure if we're real, she whispered. Command thinks someone pretending to be me. Her voice cracked then, just once. The weight of it, of being 17, of carrying her father's name through storms and bureaucracy and disbelief, pressed on her ribs until it hurt to breathe. She remembered her father's workshop, the smell of solder, the hum of old radios. When people stop believing in you, he'd said once, handing her a screwdriver, let the signal speak for itself. Truth travels farther than voices. So she steadied herself, wiped the sweat from her palms, and pushed the mic button. NATO command, this is Raven 6 to. You think I'm a threat? Then listen to me carefully. Her voice trembled but didn't break. My father's authentication was burned into this radio's core circuits. I've used his codes to keep 147 civilians alive through a storm that killed every digital system on this plane. You can run whatever test you want, but I'm not your enemy. I'm the reason they're still breathing. In the command center, silence. No one moved. Hoffman's eyes met those of the communications officer. There was conviction in that girl's voice, something no imposter could mimic. But military systems weren't built to trust emotion. Reed's voice came through again, quieter this time, like a man stepping out of protocol. Raven 6-2 Lena, you said your father taught you radio. Yes. Then you know this one. His tone softened. Call and response, old training code. She frowned, then answered instinctively, the memory surfacing from the nights she'd spent listening to his old tapes. Reed keyed the mic. Echo Bravo Charlie, authenticate response. Lena didn't hesitate. Charlie Alpha November, Raven 6 always returns. The words hit him like a gut punch. That phrase, Raven 6 always returns, was a unit saying, one only Markovik's flight wing had used. It was their bond, their promise. Reed's voice broke slightly. Command, if that's not Markovik's bloodline, I'll turn in my wings right now. In the control room, Hoffman exhaled, a long, slow release of denial. Stand down, engagement order. Every officer in the room relaxed by degrees, shoulders sagging as the tension bled out. Outside, the storm began to thin, the clouds unraveling into streaks of gold and violet. For the first time in hours, sunlight touched the wings of Flight 317. Inside the cabin, people began to weep, some out of relief, others because they could finally feel again. A child reached toward the window, pointing at the F-22 gliding beside them. "Mommy, are they angels?" The mother didn't have the heart to say otherwise. Lena just listened to the hum in her headset, her own pulse syncing with the faint signal still alive on 229.5 megahertz. She imagined her father's voice there, quiet but proud. She thought about the irony that he'd died protecting civilians, erased by those he'd served, and now his daughter was doing the same. History, it seemed, had a strange sense of rhythm. Klaus leaned closer. "They'll write about this, you know." Lena shook her head softly. "They'll write about him, that's enough." But the world was already writing about her. Down on the ground, air traffic channels buzzed with confusion. Civilian pilots in nearby sectors were recording the escort on their radars, sending screenshots to colleagues. Within minutes, social media picked up the chatter. Raven 6 began trending before the plane even descended. News anchors scrambled for footage. Reports indicate NATO fighters are escorting a commercial flight under emergency conditions. Nobody knew the full story, but fragments were enough. The mystery of a dead pilot's call sign brought back to life by a teenage girl was too powerful to ignore. In the NATO command room, General Hoffman removed his cap, running a hand through his graying hair. "God help us," he murmured. "She's just undone 3 years of silence." The officer beside him smiled faintly. "Maybe silence isn't always loyalty, sir. Sometimes it's just guilt." Up in the air, Reed spoke again. "Raven 6-2, listen closely. You're clear for descent. Berlin Tegel has emergency clearance ready. You just have to hold steady another 10 minutes. Lena nodded, though he couldn't see her. "Copy that." She turned to the captain. "They'll guide you in. Follow their lead exactly." The captain smiled, a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You've done more than any of us could." Lena looked back at her radio, the one her father had built by hand. It was warm now, not just from the circuitry, but from the energy she'd poured into it, the emotion, the stubborn refusal to stop believing it mattered. She pressed the mic again, quietly this time. "Falcon 1. Go ahead, Raven 6-2. My father, did you ever hear his last transmission?" Reed hesitated. "No, just static, then silence." Her eyes softened. "Maybe this is it." He didn't respond right away. The weight of what she said filled the cockpit, even across frequencies. Finally, he whispered, "If it is, then it's the best damn transmission I've ever heard." The storm broke apart completely then, revealing streaks of fatting sunlight across the horizon. The plane steadied. The sky seemed to breathe again. Down in the command center, Hoffman gave the only order that mattered. "All units confirm protective escort. Flight 317 is under NATO protection. Clear all airspace." An officer turned, unsure. "Sir, confirm that's official." Hoffman nodded slowly. "Official and permanent. No one buries Raven 6 again. Above, as the F-22s flanked the commercial jet, their formation lights created a corridor of safety, a promise written in motion across the sky. Lena looked through the cockpit glass, her reflection caught between two worlds, the girl she had been and the one her father had raised her to become. Faith, courage, and grief were frequencies, she realized, invisible but real. And tonight they were all transmitting. How do you land a ghost? The clouds were thinning now, torn open by the wind. The storm had left its scars, lightning burned across the horizon, a bruised sky surrendering to the first touch of light. Below, Berlin's runways glimmered faintly through the mist like veins of gold in a dark sea. From the cockpit of Flight 317, the city lights looked impossibly far away, yet for the first time in 2 hours they had direction. 2 F-22 Raptors flanked them on either side, flying in silent formation, their wings steady as guardians. The passengers who moments ago had been clutching prayer beads in strangers' hands now stared out the windows, transfixed by the sight. Lena sat in the cockpit jump seat, her father's radio resting on her knees. The green indicator pulsed with each transmission, as if breathing with her. The captain's voice came through calm now, professional, but with something reverent under the surface. Falcon 1, this is Flight 317. Visual contact confirmed. You have the lead. From the other side, Colonel Reed's voice answered, steady as a promise. Copy that, Flight 317. Follow my vector, you're doing fine. Outside, his jet banked slightly left, the civilian aircraft mirroring the movement with surgical precision. The second fighter followed, locking formation. The 3 aircraft moved as one, a triad of willpower and faith cutting through fatting turbulence. Inside, Lena's hand trembled slightly as she held the microphone. Falcon 1, signal is stable, still reading strong. Reed smiled under his oxygen mask. Your old man taught you well, Raven 6 do. She smiled faintly. He always said radios were just another way to say I'm still here. Then he's definitely here tonight, Reed said softly. Klaus wiped his eyes discreetly, pretending the cabin's dry air was the reason. As the descent began, Flight 317 broke through the final layer of clouds. The passengers gasped. Below them, Berlin shimmered in twilight, streetlights flickering like constellations. Fire engines lined along the runway, emergency lights reflecting off wet tarmac. The intercom came alive again, the captain's voice breaking through emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach into Berlin Tegel. Remain seated and calm. We are under full military escort. Applause rippled through the cabin, hesitant at first, then full, like people rediscovering how to hope out loud. But even as relief spread, tension still pulsed through every NATO channel. In the command center, General Hoffman stood before the large operations screen, watching the real-time feed. The small blinking icon labeled Raven 6 signal moved steadily toward the safe zone. The officer beside him whispered, "Sir, the media's already reporting this. The story's everywhere." Hoffman's jaw flexed. Of course it is. He turned toward the main display, the girl's voice still echoing in his head. The daughter of the man his predecessors had buried under lies was now saving hundreds, using the very call sign they'd erased. A young communications officer approached quietly. "Sir, the encryption verification came back." "And?" "It's authentic, sir. Markovic's signature code, no tampering." The general nodded slowly. "Then it's time we face what we buried." On the runway below, rescue teams stood ready, watching the dots on radar draw closer. Reporters had already begun to gather behind cordons. The story had outrun them. Whispers of Raven 6's daughter spread through social media, the legend of a girl calling her father's ghost to save a doomed flight. In the air, the captain gripped the controls. Final approach, flaps full. The plane trembled, a controlled descent now, not chaos. The storm had burned itself out, leaving a sky streaked with soft gold and steel. The passengers sat in reverent silence, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Lena's radio crackled once more. Reed's voice. "Raven 6-2, we're on your wing until touchdown. Stay calm, you've done your part." Her throat tightened. "I'm not calm." He chuckled softly. "Neither was your father." A heartbeat later, tires kissed asphalt. The plane bounced once, twice, then settled. The roar of engines revering filled the cabin. Every passenger exhaled the breath they'd been holding since the sky went dark. Applause erupted, shouts, sobs, a human chorus of disbelief and gratitude. Through the cockpit window, Lena saw the two F-22s streak past, their wings winking in acknowledgement before peeling upward into the clouds, silent, beautiful, untouchable. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the captain just sat there, head bowed, whispering a prayer he hadn't said in years. Klaus broke the silence. "You did it." Lena shook her head. "No, we did it, him and me." She tapped the radio gently, the way her father used to. "Raven 6 and Raven 6-2." Outside, emergency vehicles rolled forward, lights flashing. But there was no panic, no fire, no evacuation, just awe. People with cameras, soldiers with helmets off, firefighters with tears they didn't bother hiding. The cabin doors opened. Cold Berlin air rushed in. Reporters' voices echoed faintly from beyond the runway perimeter, shouting questions nobody yet knew how to answer. When Lena stepped out, she carried her father's radio in both hands like something sacred, something earned. She looked up into the thinning clouds where the jets had disappeared. She didn't wave, she just whispered, "Thank you." Behind her, Klaus helped steady her step as the adrenaline faded. "You've just rewritten history, child." Lena gave a small, tired smile. "No, I just reminded it to listen." At the NATO base nearby, Reed and his wingman landed minutes later. As his canopy lifted, cool night air filled the cockpit, bringing with it the heavy scent of jet fuel and rain. He sat for a long time before climbing down. His ground crew watched him silently. None dared to interrupt. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "She had his eyes," he said quietly, "and his calm." By the time Flight 317's passengers were escorted to safety, the story had already hit every major network. Headlines scrolled across global feeds. 17-year-old girl uses deceased father's military codes to save doomed flight. Raven 6 lives again. The frequency that defied death. Cameras swarmed the airport. Questions flew like shrapnel. Who was she? How did she have classified codes? Was this miracle or breach? But none of that mattered to Lena. She sat quietly on the tarmac, the radio beside her, her reflection shimmering in the metal casing. A paramedic offered her a blanket. She didn't feel cold, just empty, as if the world had been too loud and she was finally hearing silence again. General Hoffman arrived an hour later, military convoy lights washing over the runway. Reporters surged forward but were held back by security. He approached the small figure seated by the wing of the plane. "Miss Markovic." She looked up wary, exhausted. "Yes, sir." "I'm General Hoffman, NATO Command." "I know." Her voice was calm, almost distant. "You're the one who almost ordered them to shoot." He flinched. The truth in her tone hurt more than any accusation could. "Yes, I was." She turned her gaze back toward the dark horizon. "Why?" He sighed. "Because fear speaks louder than reason, until someone forces it to listen." Lena looked at him then, really looked. The man before her wasn't a villain, just a soldier haunted by protocol. "My father used to say courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to let fear make your decisions." Hoffman nodded slowly. "He was right, and we failed him." Her eyes softened. "Then don't fail him twice." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal tag, old, scratched, its engraving worn. We recovered this from the archives today. Your father's dog tag. It was never returned to your family. Lena held it in her palm, thumb tracing the letters. Anton Markovic, Raven 6. The metal was cold, but her heart was. Thank you, she said quietly. By dawn, the world had changed. Across social media, the hashtag Raven6Lives had crossed 10 million mentions. Artists were sketching tribute posters. Veterans were recording reaction videos. People who'd never heard of Anton Markovic now spoke his name with reverence. And at NATO headquarters, an emergency meeting was called. Hoffman stood before a room of commanders, his voice measured but unyielding. We buried a hero because it was convenient, he said. A 17-year-old just risked her life to remind us what honor looks like. I suggest we stop pretending we know better. No one argued. That morning, Lena woke in a quiet hotel room under government protection. The city outside was alive with sirens and reporters, but inside, everything was still. She sat by the window, the radio resting beside her, her father's dog tag around her neck. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't turn the dial. The frequency was silent but peaceful. She whispered anyway, voice barely a breath. Raven 6 mission complete, all souls safe. And though the radio gave no response, she smiled. Because somewhere deep inside the static of memory, she swore she could hear it, a faint tap of Morse code, a pattern she knew by heart. Well done, kid. Her eyes filled with tears, she pressed her forehead to the glass. Copy that, Dad. Faith didn't need proof. Sometimes it only needed a signal. What happens after the miracle? When the engines went quiet and the applause faded, the world filled the silence for her. Reporters, soldiers, engineers, everyone wanted to know how a teenage girl had done what entire systems failed to do. How a single analog radio, built from pieces of the past, had spoken louder than a billion-dollar communication network. Lena Markovic didn't have answers that satisfied anyone. She only had truth. Her truth was simple. She'd never stopped listening. The morning after the landing, Berlin's skyline glowed in cold light. Cameras flashed outside the hotel, news vans lining the street like a barricade of curiosity. NATO security had placed guards at her door, not to restrain her, but to protect her from the storm she'd unleashed. Inside, she sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, her father's dog tag resting against her skin. The radio sat on the nightstand, its copper wires slightly frayed from the strain. The hum that once filled her world was gone now. Silence, not the cold kind that followed loss, but the full kind that came after peace. She didn't need to turn it on anymore. A knock came at the door. Klaus entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee that steamed in the soft morning light. He looked older today, the kind of tired that only comes after witnessing something holy. They're calling you a hero, he said. Lena gave a faint smile. They called my father a traitor once. People believe whatever makes them comfortable, Klaus said. Yesterday, you made them uncomfortable in all the right ways. He set the coffee beside her and sat in the chair opposite. NATO's been cleaning house all night. General Hoffman gave a public statement at sunrise. Lena looked up. What did he say? Klaus's voice softened. That the world owes the Markovic family an apology, and that honor should never have an expiration date. She exhaled slowly. It's strange. I thought hearing that would make me happy. It just hurts. Maybe that's what truth feels like when it's finally set free, he said. Across the city, in a hall lined with flags and glass, General Hoffman stood before a wall of microphones. His uniform was pressed, but his expression was human, unguarded. Behind him hung a large photo, projected for the cameras. Captain Anton Markovic, smiling from the cockpit of his jet, sunlight cutting across his visor. 3 years ago, Hoffman began, we lost a pilot named Captain Anton Markovic, call sign Raven 6. The record stated that he was killed in action. What the record didn't say was how. He paused, eyes dropping to the notes in his trembling hands. He disobeyed a direct order to abandon a civilian convoy. He stayed behind to protect them. He gave his life to save 43 men, women, and children. And for that act of courage, we punished him by erasing his name. The cameras clicked like gunfire. Hoffman continued, voice low but steady. Yesterday, his daughter, 17 years old, used his call sign to save 147 passengers aboard Flight 317. She didn't just restore communication. She restored faith in honor, in family, in sacrifice. He looked up from the podium. On behalf of NATO Command, I issue a full restoration of Captain Markovic's honors and rank. His name will be etched onto the Wall of Valor permanently. Applause filled the room, but it wasn't the triumphant kind. It was mournful, heavy with recognition of a debt that could never be repaid. By midday, the world had already rewritten its headlines. NATO restores pilot's honor after daughter's heroic rescue. Courage inherited, the Markovic legacy. Raven 6 lives on. Across Europe, veterans posted photos of Markovic's old squadron insignia. Soldiers who'd once served under him came forward with memories, stories of a man who refused to follow orders that cost innocent lives. For every rumor of insubordination, there was now evidence of sacrifice. And everywhere, one phrase began to circulate. Courage is contagious. That afternoon, Lena sat before a panel of investigators. Men in suits, women with badges, cameras discreetly hidden behind mirrored glass. It wasn't an interrogation, though it felt like one. "Miss Markovic," one of them asked gently, "how did you gain access to military encryption codes?" "My father taught me," she answered simply. "Did he intend for you to use them?" She looked at the table, tracing a pattern in the wood grain. "He intended for me to know them. He said knowledge is survival." "Did you know activating that frequency would alert NATO Air Command?" "Yes. And yet you did it." Lena met their eyes. "Because everyone else on that plane was waiting for someone to save them. I was." The room was silent. For once, there was nothing to argue. When the questioning ended, one of the older investigators stopped her at the door. "Your father trained under my command," he said quietly. "We failed him. I'm sorry." Lena nodded. "Then don't fail the next person who chooses what's right over what's ordered." That night, as Berlin's lights shimmered beyond her hotel window, she turned on the TV. Every channel told her story, animated graphics, interviews, reenactments. She watched for a few minutes detached, as if the girl on the screen were someone else. Then she switched it off. The room fell into silence again, the kind her father had always loved, the kind that spoke without words. Klaus came in later, holding an envelope. "Official delivery from NATO Command," he said. Inside was a sealed invitation. "Ceremony of Valor, Ramstein Air Base." Lena looked at it for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "He's finally going home." The following week, the world watched as Ramstein's airfield transformed into a memorial ground. Rows of soldiers stood at attention beneath the cold German sun. Cameras rolled, but this time, even the journalists spoke softly, as though the air demanded reverence. Lena stepped forward in a simple black coat, her braid tied neatly, her father's dog tag glinting at her neck. She carried the radio in both hands, the same one that had saved so many lives. General Hoffman met her at the podium. His voice wavered slightly as he addressed the crowd. "Captain Anton Markovic once said, 'Courage doesn't die, it changes altitude.'" He turned toward Lena. "His daughter proved that. She carried his signal through the storm, through fear, through the silence we created, and she reminded us what service means." He paused, eyes glassy. "Miss Markovic, on behalf of every pilot who ever believed honor was worth dying for, thank you for teaching us it's also worth living for." He presented her with a medal, not for bravery, but for valor in communication and life-saving service. It glittered beneath the gray light as she accepted it quietly. She spoke next, voice soft but clear enough to carry across the runway. My father taught me that the sky listens to those who speak with courage. Yesterday, it proved him right. She glanced at the line of names carved into the wall of valor. He used to say he wanted the world to be quiet, quiet enough that nobody ever needed rescuing again. That's still my hope. There was no applause, just stillness, the kind that felt like prayer. After the ceremony, a pilot with gray at his temples approached her, holding something wrapped in cloth. He wore this the day he saved us, the man said. We thought it was lost. Lena unfolded the fabric and saw what lay inside, a fragment of her father's flight helmet, still streaked with sand and time. The faded call sign Raven 6 was barely visible, but she didn't need to see it. She could feel it. Thank you, she whispered. Nearby, a little girl ran up, tugging her sleeve. It was the same child who'd drawn the picture on the plane, the one with the word angels scrawled in crayon beneath two aircraft. Lena knelt to her level. The girl held out the drawing again, this time laminated. Mom says you called them from the sky, she said. Lena smiled gently. No, I just made sure they could hear us. The girl tilted her head. Do you think your daddy heard you too? Lena looked toward the horizon, where the sun was setting in streaks of amber and silver. I know he did. That night she returned to the memorial alone. The wall of valor gleamed under floodlights, rows of names etched into steel. She found his Captain Anton Markovic, Raven 6. She set the radio down at the base of the wall, its wires coiled neatly, and switched it on one last time. The familiar hum filled the air, warm and nostalgic. She adjusted the dial to 229.5 megahertz and pressed the button. Raven 6, this is Raven 6, she whispered. Mission complete, all souls safe, returning to base. For a heartbeat there was only static, then faintly, impossibly, a series of taps. Morse code. Well done, kid. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her hand to his name, smiling through the ache. Copy that, Dad. The radio went silent again, but it didn't feel like loss this time. It felt like peace. Faith wasn't about believing in miracles. It was about listening for them when the world told you to give up. And some frequencies, she realized, were meant to be eternal. How do you live after the world has already written your ending? When the applause died and the medals cooled in her hands, Lena Markovic found herself standing in a quiet Berlin hotel room again, the same silence as before, but now it carried a different kind of weight. Not grief, not fear, something else. The stillness that follows purpose, the stillness that asks, what now? Outside, the city moved like nothing had changed. Cars, people, laughter spilling from cafes, unaware they were walking across streets where history had just rewritten itself. For the world, Raven 6 had become a legend overnight, a modern myth with a heartbeat. Her face was on magazine covers, her voice replayed in news loops, her photo stitched into collages beside her father's. For her, though, the attention felt unreal, like static too loud to decode. She wasn't chasing fame. She'd only wanted the sky to hear one man's name again. But the world didn't let go so easily. By the end of that month, invitations poured in, conferences, interviews, research offers from universities, sponsorships from defense contractors. Each one promising something different, but all chasing the same story. The miracle girl who revived a dead call sign. She declined them all. Klaus understood before anyone else. You didn't do this to become famous, he told her one afternoon as they walked along the Spree River. You did it because you couldn't stand silence anymore. Lena nodded slowly, and now everyone wants to fill that silence with noise. He smiled, that kind, weathered smile of someone who's seen cycles of history repeat. Noise fades, meaning stays. She looked up at the gray German sky, the same sky that had nearly swallowed her. Meaning, she said softly. That's what he taught me to chase. In the weeks that followed, meaning began to find her. NATO established a scholarship in her father's name, the Raven 6 Memorial Fellowship, for students in radio engineering and aviation safety. They asked Lena to be the first recipient. She accepted quietly on one condition, that her father's full mission logs be declassified for public study. Hoffman agreed. When the files were released, the truth landed harder than any official apology. The mission report detailed every minute of Captain Markovic's final flight, his refusal to retreat, his decision to hold formation while civilians evacuated, his last words over the radio. If they make it out alive, it's worth it. Tell my daughter to keep listening. Those words spread like wildfire. They became a mantra, printed on classroom walls, stitched onto pilot jackets, quoted in articles about courage. Keep listening. It wasn't about radio anymore. It was about conscience, about humanity's signal cutting through interference. Lena began her studies at the European Aviation Academy the following year. Her dorm room was small, filled with papers, wires, and old equipment she scavenged from military surplus stores. Most students decorated their rooms with posters. She hung only one thing, her father's flight patch, framed above her desk. She kept to herself mostly, polite but distant. Professors expected the hero girl to walk in glowing with confidence, but she was quiet, deliberate. She spoke only when she had something worth saying, and when she did, the room always listened. Her instructors soon realized she possessed something more than talent, instinct. She could identify interference patterns by ear alone, diagnose faults without looking at readouts. She seemed to hear things others couldn't. One evening after class, her instructor, a veteran pilot named Captain Brodsky, called her aside. "You hear static like music," he said. "Your father was the same. He could detect distress before instruments did." Lena smiled faintly. "He said radio was like a heartbeat. If you listen long enough, you can tell when something's wrong." Brodsky nodded. "Keep that, machines fail, heartbeats don't lie." She began working on a research paper that would later redefine aviation safety. Inherited frequencies, integrating analog redundancy into modern communication protocols. It argued for hybrid systems, old and new, so that when digital networks collapse, human knowledge can still bridge the gap. Her thesis advisor called it idealistic. Lena called it survival. At night, when the academy grounds fell silent, she'd sit by her dorm window with the old radio, the copper wire still wrapped around its base. She rarely turned it on now, but sometimes, during storms, she'd tune to 229.5 megahertz just to hear the soft hiss of static, like the sound of her father breathing somewhere far beyond reach. One night during a heavy downpour, she heard a faint echo, too faint to record, too fragile to prove. Just 3 short bursts of tone. Morse code. "Proud of you." She smiled, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Copy that." The years moved quietly. News headlines shifted to other crises, other heroes. But in classrooms and control towers, Raven 62 lived on not as a viral story, but as a lesson. Flight academies across Europe added her case to their curriculum. Cadets studied her emergency frequency adaptation as part of crisis protocol training. The NATO Communications Network designated 229.5 MHz as the Raven 6 memorial frequency. Official policy: always monitored, always open. Sometimes during night shifts, operators swore they heard faint whispers through the channel, patterns too organized to be static, too random to trace. Some claimed it was just atmospheric bounce, others said it was impossible. But a few smiled and said, maybe Raven 6 just checks in now and then. Lena graduated at 21. Her speech lasted less than a minute. "I didn't get here by chasing new frequencies," she said. "I got here by listening to old ones." After graduation, She joined the European Aviation Research Corps as a systems engineer, designing hybrid analog-digital communication failsafes. Her work saved lives without fanfare, her name quietly attached to updates in manuals and protocols. That suited her. She didn't need recognition, she had legacy. Klaus remained a fixture in her life, mentor, friend, surrogate grandfather. They met every month, always at the same cafe near the river. He'd bring fresh schematics, she'd bring stories from her work. Once over coffee he asked, "Do you ever miss it, the noise, the attention?" She shook her head. "No, fame fades faster than a signal in storm weather, but what stays, that's the echo that matters." He smiled. "You sound more like your father every time." "Then I'm doing something right." Her work soon reached across borders. American and Japanese aviation councils adopted her analog backup models. Her name appeared in journals beside military engineers decades older, but she never sought the spotlight. Each innovation was a quiet tribute. A conversation with her father continued through code and circuit. When she turned 25, she returned to Warsaw, to the small apartment where she'd grown up. The wallpaper hadn't changed, though time had faded its colors. Her grandmother's old radio table still sat by the window, dusty, untouched. She set the Falcon TX on it, the same way it used to rest when she was 13, listening for ghosts. Outside, children played on the street. Life had gone on. But inside that apartment, memories hummed in the air, solder, laughter, static. She spoke softly into the stillness. "You were right, Dad. Analog never dies, it just waits to be heard again." Her eyes fell on a letter tucked inside one of her textbooks, one she'd written to herself at 17, the night before the flight competition. The ink was smudged, the handwriting uneven. "If I ever lose faith, remind me that signals don't disappear. They just travel farther than I can see." She folded it back carefully. Weeks later, she was invited to teach part-time at the academy. Her students, wide-eyed, impatient, full of modern arrogance, learned quickly that their professor valued silence as much as speech. On the first day, she wrote one sentence on the board: "Listening is the oldest form of courage." They didn't understand it at first, but when she told them the story, her father, the storm, the silence that followed, they did. During one lecture, a cadet raised his hand. "Ma'am, do you think heroes still exist in our generation?" Lena looked at him for a long moment, her gaze gentle but steady. "Yes, but they don't always make noise when they act. Sometimes they're just the ones who refuse to stop listening." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, echoing faintly through the open window. That night, alone in the control lab, she powered up the radio once more. The green light flickered to life. She tuned to 229.5 megahertz and waited, the same way she used to, not for proof, not for answers, just to remember. Static filled the room. Then, after a long silence, a faint hum rose, rhythmic, comforting, like an old friend breathing through the noise. She smiled. "Good night, Raven 6. No reply came. None was needed. Some messages don't travel in words, they travel in presence. Years later, when new cadets visited the Academy Museum, they would stop before a small glass display. Inside sat a weathered Falcon TX radio, its copper wire coiled neatly, the label beneath reading: Raven 6, the frequency that never died. Donated by engineer Lena Markovic, Raven 6-2. And beside it, engraved in small letters: Honor doesn't die, it transmits forward. The visitors always left quiet, thoughtful. Some even touched the glass, as though the static inside might still hum if they listened hard enough. In the stillness that followed, it always seemed the air carried a whisper, a faint, proud echo from far above. Keep listening. When the world remembers you as a story, how do you keep living as a person? Years passed. Seasons folded quietly over themselves, one sky blending into another. Wars ended. Technology changed. But on every NATO frequency list between pages of codes and coordinates, one number never moved: 229.5 megahertz. They called it the Raven Channel. New cadets were told it was tradition to tune in once during their training. For luck, instructors said. But some believed it was more than that, a way to remind themselves that the sky, though vast and indifferent, sometimes still listened. And somewhere, in a quiet room filled with the hum of circuits and memory, Lena Markovic kept the habit alive. By the time she was 30, her name had become almost mythic in aviation circles. The girl who spoke to the sky. Professors taught her crisis recordings in ethics courses. Pilots quoted her words before takeoff. Yet, in person, she remained elusive, preferring solitude to speeches, research to ceremonies. She never sought to control her story. She just wanted to live inside it, quietly, honestly, without performance. Her life had settled into rhythm, teaching, designing, mentoring. Her mornings were filled with lectures on signal redundancy, her evenings with soldering new prototypes in the workshop behind her apartment. She lived simply, almost austerely. The only ornament on her wall was the fragment of her father's helmet, mounted above the desk where she built. Some nights when the rain began to fall, she would stop working and just listen, not to the thunder but to the faint pulse of the city below. The hum of trains, the faint electric buzz in the air. Every sound meant someone was alive, her father used to say. Every frequency, a heartbeat. It was on one of those nights that a letter arrived from the United States Air Command. Official seal, heavy paper. She hesitated before opening it. Inside, an invitation. International Symposium on Aviation Ethics and Crisis Response. The topic, inherited frequencies. How human legacy shapes modern protocols. She read the next line twice. Keynote speaker, engineer Lena Markovic, Raven 6-2. For a long moment, she didn't move. The past she had tried to live quietly beneath had found her again, dressed in praise and formality. Klaus, now in his 80s, called that evening. "They want you to speak," he said, "to tell the story yourself." "I already did," she replied, "that night in the sky." He chuckled softly. "Then tell it again, this time to the ones who think courage is a machine they can build." So she went. The conference hall in Washington, D.C. was lined with flags and filled with the hum of hundreds of officers, engineers, and students. She stepped onto the stage wearing a dark gray suit, hair pulled back, her father's dog tag resting beneath her collar. The applause was long, respectful, but when she began speaking, the room fell utterly still. "I was 17 when I learned that silence could kill," she began. "And that sometimes, the only way to save lives is to remember what others forgot." She spoke simply, without theatrics, about the storm, the codes, the voice that answered through static, about courage not as heroism but as endurance, the refusal to stop listening when the world goes quiet. She ended with words she hadn't planned. They came naturally, like memory returning to frequency. "Technology can replace our systems," she said, "but not our conscience. My father taught me that when communication dies, humanity must become the signal." For a moment no one breathed. Then applause rose, not thunderous but reverent, slow, building like a heartbeat. Afterward a young officer approached her, uniform crisp, voice uncertain. "Ma'am, my father flew in the Baltic patrols. He said Captain Markovic once pulled him out of a dive when his systems froze. He always said Raven 6 never left anyone behind. I just wanted to say, now I understand why." Lena smiled, eyes glistening. "Neither do his students." The officer hesitated. "Do you still listen to the frequency?" She looked past him toward the ceiling lights that reminded her of stars. "Always, even when the radio's off." When she returned to Warsaw, she found herself thinking more about legacy, not fame, not history, but the invisible lines between generations. How courage isn't taught in words but transmitted through action, like sound waves across time. So she began mentoring young engineers directly, small groups, late-night workshops, teaching them the art of analog resilience, how to build from scraps, how to understand the hum of a signal like a living thing. Her students adored her, not because she was famous, but because she was patient. She never lectured about heroism. She spoke about listening. One evening, while testing an old transmitter, a student asked, "Professor, do you believe your father really answered you that night?" She smiled softly. "What I believe doesn't matter. What mattered was that I was listening hard enough to hear him if he did." The boy nodded, unsure but thoughtful. That night when everyone left, she stayed behind. She turned on the radio, tuned it to 229.5 megahertz, and let the static fill the room. The sound was gentle, familiar, like an old friend returning home. And then faintly, beneath the hiss, she heard something. A series of clicks, slow, deliberate. She smiled, Morse for 3 letters, D a D. Maybe it was atmospheric bounce. Maybe it was her imagination. She didn't care. Some things you don't need to explain to believe. That same year, NATO renamed the Aviation Communication Research Wing in Ramstein the Markovic Center for Ethical Engineering. Its motto engraved on the front gate: "Courage doesn't die, it transmits forward." Lena attended the unveiling ceremony quietly. Cameras flashed, speeches rolled, but she lingered at the back, content to watch. Hoffman, now retired but present as a guest of honor, found her there. His hair was white now, his hands trembling with age. "I kept my promise," he said softly. "No one buried your father again." She smiled, "And no one buried the truth." He nodded, eyes wet. "You know, I still hear that frequency sometimes, late at night. My technicians swear it's empty, but—" She looked toward the sky. "Maybe the empty channels are just the ones waiting for us." That evening, as she walked alone through the quiet corridors of the new facility, she stopped by a wall plaque listing names of major contributors. There it was. Captain Anton Markovic, Raven 6. Engineer Lena Markovic, Raven 62. She traced the engraving with her fingers, remembering his hands guiding hers when she was a child, showing her how to solder circuits. "Every connection matters," he'd said, "even the invisible ones." Years later, when storms rolled over Europe, operators would still monitor the Raven channel. Sometimes they swore they heard twin signals, one steady, one faint, dancing across the static. They called it the echo pattern. Others said it was just coincidence. But for those who believed, it was simple: a father and daughter flying side by side across eternity. Lena grew older, her voice gentler, her presence rarer in public. But her influence grew in silence. Students she'd taught became instructors. Pilots she'd trained became mentors. The Markovic Protocol became a global standard, a requirement in both military and civilian training. When all else fails, listen. She never claimed ownership of the idea. "It belongs to the sky," she'd say. "I just helped it speak again." One day, decades later, a young cadet found her sitting by the airfield, sketching faint lines in her notebook. He approached timidly. "Professor Markovic." She looked up, smiling. "You're the new Raven 6 fellow." "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to thank you. My father says your work saved his squadron last year. They lost all systems in a storm, but the analog backup kept them steady until help arrived." Lena's smile softened. "Then your father already thanked me by surviving." He hesitated. "We still use your father's call sign during training. Every time we test the old frequency, we say Raven 6 ready. It feels respectful." She looked out at the fading horizon, eyes warm. "He'd like that." The cadet hesitated again, then asked, "Do you ever miss him?" "Every day," she said quietly. "But missing someone is just another form of listening." That evening, as the sun dipped low, she sat alone by the runway, the same hum of engines in the distance, the same whispering wind. Time had changed her face, but not her heart. The dog tag around her neck had dulled, but its weight felt the same, a small, constant gravity keeping her tethered to memory. She took the radio out one last time, the same Falcon TX, now old, scarred, but still functional. She tuned it to 229.5 megahertz. Static greeted her like an old companion. She whispered, "Raven 6, this is Raven 6-2, still listening." And maybe, just maybe, somewhere beyond reach, a voice replied. Not words, just a pulse, a steady heartbeat across the distance of time. Faith wasn't blind belief. It was hearing what the world called silence and recognizing it as music. How long does a signal last after it leaves its source? Physicists say forever. Once a wave is born, it never really dies. It only grows weaker, lost among others. Maybe that was what love was, too, an endless transmission fading into eternity, waiting for someone still listening. By the time Lena Markovic reached her late 50s, the world she'd once fought to make hear her had transformed. Jets no longer relied on pilots alone. Artificial intelligence guided formations now, satellites created sky-wide webs of data, and yet, inside every system, one line remained in the manual, the Markovic protocol. When all else fails, listen. Frequency 229.5 megahertz must remain open at all times. Some called it superstition, others called it faith. But no pilot ever dared question it. The Raven Channel had become legend. Every new cadet before their first solo flight was told the story of the girl who saved a plane with her father's call sign, of the voice that answered back. They'd hear the static once, close their eyes and whisper, "Raven 6, watch over me." And somewhere in the ether, maybe it did. Lena lived quietly in Warsaw, in the same apartment where her father had once soldered wires by hand. The city had changed, taller, louder, brighter, but her small workshop remained untouched. Wood table, old oscilloscopes, the Falcon TX radio resting on a shelf like a relic. Each morning she brewed coffee, opened her window to the hum of traffic, and wrote small notes in a leather journal, not research now, just reflections. She never thought of them as memoirs. She thought of them as signals. Courage is a frequency the fearful can't jam. We remember the dead by how well we keep listening. The silence between transmissions isn't emptiness, it's trust. Sometimes she'd laugh softly at herself. Too poetic for engineering, she'd murmur, but she kept writing. Words, like radio waves, needed space to travel. One winter evening the doorbell rang. When she opened it, a woman stood there, uniformed, young, face half hidden beneath the shadow of her cap. She introduced herself softly. "Captain Alina Reed, NATO Communications Wing." The name froze time for a heartbeat. "Reed," Lena repeated. "Yes, ma'am. My grandfather was Colonel Marcus Reed. He said you once flew together in a way." Lena smiled. "He saved us all." Alina returned the smile. "He used to say you did." The young officer held out a sealed envelope. "He passed last month. Before he did, he asked that this be delivered to you." Lena took it gently. Inside was a folded letter, written in an unsteady hand. "Raven 6-2. If you're reading this, I'm already wheels up for the last flight. I've kept your frequency open every night since that storm. Sometimes I swore I heard two signals in the static, his and yours. Maybe heaven's just a place where transmissions never fade. Thank you for proving what he taught us, that conscience is stronger than command. Fly safe always. Read." Her hands trembled as she folded the letter. "He kept listening," she whispered. Alina nodded. "He said it helped him sleep, that knowing someone out there refused to let silence win." They sat for tea, 2 generations of a promise kept. Alina showed her photos, new aircraft, hybrid control panels using analog backups designed under Lena's protocols. "We still call it the Markovic net," she said proudly. "It's built into every NATO and civilian fleet now." Lena looked at the young pilot and saw reflections of herself, the same spark of stubborn belief, the same quiet steadiness. "Your generation flies with more power than we ever dreamed," she said. "Just don't forget the simplest rule." Alina grinned. "Keep listening." "Always." When the officer left, the apartment felt both emptier and fuller at once, like a signal fading, leaving warmth behind. Weeks later, Lena visited the memorial at Ramstein for the first time in years. The wall of valor stretched farther now, engraved with decades of names. She found her father's easily. She could have traced it blindfolded. Beside it, someone had added a smaller plaque, in memory of those who carried his signal forward. Raven 6-2, Lena Markovic. She laughed softly. "I'm not gone yet," she whispered, but she didn't remove it. It felt right, not an ending, just another frequency joining the chorus. She placed a small transmitter at the base of the wall, a project she'd built for her students. It was set to broadcast a single repeating message on low power, just a whisper in the atmosphere. "Courage doesn't die, it transmits forward." Then she stood in silence until dusk. When she turned to leave, a faint gust of wind carried a sound, not quite static, not quite echo, but unmistakably familiar. Tap, pause, tap, tap. She closed her eyes, Morse for okay. Her smile was tired, luminous. Copy that. Back in Warsaw, life continued in smaller, quieter circles. She retired from active research but remained an advisor, answering questions from young engineers around the world. Her email signature read simply, L. Markovic, Raven 6-2 Ret, still listening. Every year, on the anniversary of Flight 317, she'd receive messages from survivors, photos of children who'd grown, families reunited, lives quietly lived because a teenager refused to surrender to silence. She kept every note in a box labeled Echoes. One message arrived from a girl who had been a baby on that flight. Now 25, she wrote. Dear Ms. Markovic, my mother told me I once slept through a miracle. Thank you for letting me grow up. I joined the Air Force last year. I listened to 229.5 every night. Sometimes I think I hear you. Lena smiled through tears. Maybe you do, she whispered. As the years pressed on, her hands grew slower, her hearing softer, but her sense for frequencies remained sharp, almost supernatural. Her students joked she could still pick up a heartbeat through static. One summer night, thunder rolled across Warsaw again. She sat by the window, the Falcon TX before her, dog tag resting on the table. The air smelled of ozone and rain, the same scent as that night long ago. She tuned the radio, the green light flickering weakly. Static rose and fell like waves. She closed her eyes and whispered the words that had started it all. Raven 6, this is your daughter. If you can hear me, mission complete. The static softened. Then through the hiss came a faint, rhythmic pulse. The same tone pattern recorded decades earlier, the one engineers had never explained. Well done, kid. She laughed through her tears, resting her hand over the speaker. Took you long enough. Outside, lightning split the sky, bright, brief, magnificent. When morning came, neighbors found her asleep at her desk, a peaceful smile on her face, the radio still glowing faintly. On the frequency log, the last recorded signal showed a brief, strong burst before fading into silence. No one could trace its origin. No one tried. Weeks later at her memorial, hundreds gathered, soldiers, engineers, families, students. General Hoffman's grandchildren read her favorite line aloud. Honor doesn't die with the person who earned it. It flies forward. And at exactly the moment they released her ashes into the wind, air traffic control stations across Europe reported a strange anomaly. A faint ping on 229.5 megahertz, synchronized to every radar sweep. For 10 seconds, the frequency glowed alive. Then it vanished. The technicians didn't log it as interference. They labeled it simply Raven 6 signal active. In the years that followed, the world changed again. Planes flew higher, quieter. AI pilots replaced most humans, but the Raven channel stayed open, always monitored, always sacred. And sometimes, during night flights, when storms churned over the Baltic and instruments flickered, young pilots swore they heard a calm female voice through the static, guiding them home. A voice that said, "Hold course, you're not alone." Scientists dismissed it as cross-band interference. But the ones who believed just smiled and whispered back, "Copy that, Raven 6 do." Because some stories don't end, they change altitude. Some call signs never go silent. They just climb higher beyond radar, beyond reach, where the air is thin, but the signal never dies. And if you listen hard enough, through the hiss and hum of life itself, you might still hear it faint, patient, eternal. Keep listening.